Good morning, Jim. It's Rick Adams in San Jose.
Hey, Rick. How you doing?
Hey, you're looking well.
I'm feeling well too, thank you.
Rick, you're muted.
Oops. Did you want us to mute ourselves and stop the videos so it'll run more smoothly for you?
Yes, Rick, and I'll be going over a little bit of those housekeeping items in a little bit.
Hi, Eric. How are you?
I'm good, Rick. How you doing?
I'm great.
Yeah, it's been a long time
How's
since
the family?
Everybody's doing good. Everybody's doing good. All right. Yeah, let me get this started here. Welcome, everybody. I think most people are on non-video. And so this is the first time that we're using this platform. We usually use GoToWebinar, which is a little bit more friendly for this type of a setting, this type of a presentation. So please forgive us. We're on a learning curve here on the steep part of it right now. Today's webinar is scheduled or entitled A Conversation with Kelly Craighead, who is the president and CEO of the Cruise Line International Association. Due to the number of people on this call, what we're going to try and do, and we'll do it soon, if you can do it on your own, that's great. If you can mute yourself, that would be good. And if you can also turn off your video, that would also be good. What we were trying to do is just to get the speakers up onto the screen. And that's going to mainly be Morgan and Kelly. And then if you're not familiar with this is a Zoom product, which most of you have probably been on at one point or another. One of the things you can do if you're seeing a bunch of boxes up on your screen, some with video and some with just the names in a black box, on your own screen in the top right corner, you should see 3 little dots. And if you click on those 3 little dots, you should be able to choose the option to hide non-video participants, which is then only going to have the people that are on video up on the screen. And so that should make it a little bit more friendly throughout the presentation. If you have questions during this session, we ask that you use the chat feature, which is down at the bottom of your screen. And when using the chat feature, please make sure that you choose Morgan Maravich that you want to send the chat to or the question to, because she's going to be moderating this. So I do see more people coming on. So I just want to repeat, if you would, on your own, mute yourself as well as turn your video off, because we're going to want only the speakers, which will mainly be Morgan and Kelly, to be seen on the screen. So at this time, I want to ask Dave Ryan. He's going to continue with a few more opening remarks and introductions. Dave?
Great. Thank you, Eric. For those of you that are not Skal members on the call, we want to welcome you to, I believe, the 7th in our series of travel executive webinars. And we do have one more scheduled in August. On August 13th, we're going to revisit with Roger Dow, who is the president and CEO of the U.S. Travel Association and also a member of the White House Task Force on Economic Recovery. So please join us for a revisit with Roger Dow on August 13th. If you are not a Skal member and you join this meeting and you're interested in finding out about Skal, please reach out to the person that invited you or myself, and we'd be happy to give you more information about a Skal club in your city. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Morgan, who will introduce our presenter for today and take it from here.
Thanks, David, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It is my honor and privilege to introduce our speaker, Kelly Craighead, who is the president and CEO of Cruise Lines International Association, otherwise known as CLIA. As the world's largest cruise industry trade association, CLIA represents all segments of the cruise industry, including 278 ocean-going cruise ships, 13 river marketing affiliates, and a travel agent community comprised of 53,000 agents worldwide, as well as hundreds of cruise line suppliers and partners ranging from ports and destinations to shipbuilders and developers. CLIA has offices located in 7 regions around the world, and Ms. Kelly Craighead is responsible for developing and executing an overall strategy to support this broad and deep international business coalition. Prior to joining CLIA in 2019, Kelly served in executive leadership positions in the public and private sectors. And I have to say, I got to know her when she was serving in the Department of Commerce as the first Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Travel and Tourism Department as Executive Director of the National Travel and Tourism Office. So welcome, Kelly, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, David, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I've been to a few Skal meetings. I'm always excited to join this community, and it's just a pleasure to be able to talk a little bit about the cruise industry. And I'm especially looking forward to the Q&A with Morgan. So we put together a couple of slides that will help kind of outline how the industry is going from response to recovery. I am guided by my colleague, Laziza Lambert, who is less technically challenged than I am to help me with these slides. So you'll hear me ask her to advance the slides. So as Morgan said, CLIA does represent the world's cruising community. So it's the wider cruise community. It's not just the ocean-going cruise lines, it's also the river operators. It's outstanding travel agents, travel advisors, travel agencies, suppliers that include ports and destinations, and so it's a privilege to represent this industry, despite the fact I joined CLIA about 1.5 years ago, just in time for the COVID crisis to hit. I won't spend much time on this slide because Morgan did such a nice job of that on our introduction, so I'll go on to the next one. And again, represents this dynamic community that's important to really point out, because as a trade association at this time of crisis, trying to communicate in effective ways is really challenging. And opportunities like this to speak to groups like you helps us get the message out. And why I'm excited to answer questions is so that you can help amplify some of these messages. Travel and tourism has been so hard hit by this entire pandemic, and cruising especially so, that I think it's really helpful to have you amplify all of the positive efforts that our members have been going to during this difficult time. So next. So I'll start by saying, as many of you know, the cruise industry has extensive experience in providing for the well-being of passengers and for crew. From the earliest moments of the pandemic, even before it was declared a global pandemic, the cruise lines went into action. They put in place some of the most stringent protocols, more than we're seeing anywhere else, to help with both geographic spread, but some of the medical enhancements, temperature taking, and what have you. From the very beginning, putting people first was the focus for all of the cruise lines. This was particularly true as we tried to repatriate almost 272 ships. So as one of the first industries to suspend global operations, it was a particularly challenging first couple of weeks of the pandemic, in part because there were so many passengers that had to be repatriated. And working with the different governments and countries as the borders closed to try and repatriate passengers was job number one. And now we're in the place of trying to repatriate crew, which just really is one of the reasons why the cruise industry is so unique, is because there are so many logistics involved. There's crew from more than 100 countries that need to go back. And again, we're always on the ready to see when the resumption of operations may happen, and we'll have to reverse that process. One thing I just wanted to note, just generally, because I think one of the reasons cruise stands out, and it was an interesting fact that I learned when I joined the cruise industry, is that the cruise industry is one of the few industries that has the level of reporting that the industry has. So unlike even airlines, the level of reporting and the amount of data that's provided, whether there's a pandemic or not, is pretty unbelievable. And it really does help support the journalists that are writing stories that cover the industry, because there is so much data available. So one of the challenges we had to contend with is the role that cruise ships played with the virus, as it is neither the cause of the virus and nor is it something that the industry is not used to dealing with, because the history with norovirus and other kind of health conditions on ships is something that the cruise lines are uniquely positioned to deal with state-of-the-art medical facilities and lots of experience. So it's important to really remind people that there has been this long record of providing for public health, and we're in the moment now where we look forward to having an updated public health policy that will again put the cruise industry in a position of leading in putting people first and providing for some of the highest qualities of care. So as we move along to the next slide, you know, part of what is unique about the cruise industry was the voluntary suspension. We are currently in the United States under a no sail order that is in place until July 24th, and we're expecting that it's going to be extended. We didn't wait for the government to extend the no sail order. We voluntarily suspended first in March and again extended the government's no sail order until September 15th. So one of the things that makes the industry so unique is because I think the whole wide world is continuing to learn about the virus. And although it's a backhanded compliment, which is probably not the right word, but we do have an opportunity, because operations for the most part are suspended, that we can continually learn about the virus. And we expect that between now and September 15th, as we look towards resumption of operations, that we'll be able to benefit from all of the learnings from all of the experts we're engaging, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Next slide. So clearly the economics of cruising is quite significant. One of my kind of favorite, again, wrong word, kind of fun facts to share is that for every 1% loss in cruisers, there's 9,100 jobs lost. This is significant in the communities where cruising takes place. As a $150 billion output to economies, it is smaller than some of the other travel segments, but what was exciting about the industry before COVID is it was one of the fastest growing industry sectors. This is something that we really work hard to try and balance, because obviously public health, public safety are beyond top priorities. I mean, they're such a priority, they don't even count on the list. But trying to balance all of the work that we're doing in recognition that this has caused a significant hit, not just to the cruise lines, but again, to this wider cruising ecosystem that's critically important to our success. So we are very mindful as we work to try to develop protocols and to work with the governments around the world, that we're balancing public health with the real economic impact so that we're making smart choices. Next slide. So right now, each of our member cruise lines are working furiously on resumption plans. These plans are still developing, and again, as I said earlier, really have the opportunity to take the best learnings as each day proceeds. Many of the cruise lines are working with some of the top epidemiologists around the world, also engaging all of the expertise from science. It's one of the reasons why, unlike some of the other industry sectors, we have not put out a final protocol plan, but we do have a general sense of the considerations that are underway with the ocean-going cruise lines that includes, as you might expect, enhanced screening. Again, enhanced screening on the front end, that is something we started to do in January and February at the beginning of the pandemic. And again, where we think we have an opportunity to lead the way in some of the state-of-the-art practices in screening. Secondly, and again, as someone who's relatively new to the cruise industry, something that always struck me about the industry is just the cleaning and sanitation protocols that were in place already, and the degree to which and the innovation with which each of these cruise lines are embracing even new technologies around increased sanitation and cleaning. As everyone has heard from other industries, social distancing is a significant consideration that's underway. One of the projects we're working on at CLIA that I'm excited to be able to release sometime soon is really just the understanding of how much space exists on some of these cruise ships. About 30 million passengers have cruised in any given year, which is actually not that big of a number. And so sometimes we contend with this idea that people are packed into ships like sardines, when in fact there's a great deal of space. And the crew is really talented and capable of moving people around. And so we do want to try and express why there is ample space and the ability to do some social distancing when cruising resumes. One of the other things that has been often talked about is the role of buffets and how that might change in the future. And really, what does it mean to have shoreside excursions? I think some of the challenges right now is how do we protect passengers, but also the local communities that we visit. And these are some of the discussions where testing is so important. And again, as we look towards resumption of cruising, you know, you can expect to see a phased in return with some limited itineraries as we really navigate these next steps. One thing that I mentioned earlier that again, I think is one of the assets of the cruise industry is the state-of-the-art medical facilities that are on board each of these ships, and just the level of care and the work and the focus that's taking place around what actually happens if there is a case of COVID on the ship. And again, this is an opportunity for the cruise industry to lead over other sectors in that we already have those built-in state-of-the-art facilities. Some of the other areas that we're considering is just the training in the crew for all of these situations and how we think about what happens off the ship. So when we think about door-to-door service in the resumption plans, everything about before you book your trip, everything for while you're on the ship, when you're off the ship during excursions, but also what are the capabilities that are necessary to leave the ship. Next. So we kind of skipped through a lot of things quickly, but I think it's important to really talk about the kind of the breakdown and where cruising is happening. The United States is the largest market with $53 billion in total economic impact, with $24 billion in direct spend, supporting 421,000 American jobs. These are some of the facts that we worked very hard to get out during many of the discussions around Capitol Hill, where the cruise lines didn't seek financial relief, but where CLIA really engaged to support the small and medium-sized businesses that make up our wider cruise community. Because it is so important that these small and medium-sized businesses, many of whom I believe are on this call, could benefit from the opportunity to leverage CLIA's ability to speak with one voice about the wider cruise community. One of the things we're working on right now is to continue to engage and build a coalition of cruise supporters so that we can really get this story out, the positive story about cruising, the role that we'd like to play as a leader of responsible tourism, and working with the ports and destinations as we work to develop what's ultimately going to be a COVID-19 policy for all of our members to subscribe to, has been an important part of the planning process, because it's critical that we engage tour operators, ports, and cruise ships and others to make sure that what the final product is actually is representative of all the work that needs to get done and will ensure safe sailing for our passengers, for the crew, and for the communities we visit. One of the areas where we're seeing some particular progress is in Europe, where some cruising has already started to resume. And recently, as of Friday, the UK government has drawn a distinction between river operations and ocean-going cruising. So we're looking forward to the lessons that we're going to learn in Europe as we look to the Caribbean and the North American and the Australasian markets to come back online when the time is right. So I think I've covered everything in a broad brushstroke, Morgan, and I think we'll get a lot more questions in the Q&A, so I'm happy now to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. And as you said, it was very thorough, and you hit a lot of different broad areas there. So I do have a few questions for you that have come in, and then I'll start it off with David Ryan, our Skal USA president. So he asks, he says, "Hi, Kelly. Do you anticipate a return to pre-COVID cruise demand levels at some point? And when do you think that that might happen, if ever?"
Well, CLIA always sits in an interesting place about bookings and aren't really able to speak at that level of detail, but I can talk about kind of the broad trend and the sentiment towards cruising. And CLIA has done quite a bit of sentiment tracking, and sentiment for cruising remains strong. The longer the suspension in the US goes on, we see some drop in the intent to travel. But for the most part, and pretty consistently since the beginning of the pandemic, we've seen strong sentiment in support of cruising from all market segments, and especially the millennials, which was one of the segments that we highlighted last year as new to cruise that is a potential growth area.
Excellent. Seeing that millennial growth area is fantastic. Particularly, I know a lot of different demographics have gone after that age segment. So to see that growth area is very, very important. Joseph Lecheson is asking, what differences, if any, do you see between how river cruise lines are impacted and how they will recover versus ocean cruise lines?
Right. Well, it's a good and interesting question, and a lot of it is playing it out now. So we support ocean-going cruise lines with public policy development because some, to be a CLIA member, I should back up and tell you, to be a CLIA member, you subscribe to a compendium of policies that go over and beyond what the laws and regulations are. And those laws and regulations are governed by the IMO, International Maritime Organization. And river cruising is outside of that structure. So we actually support each of these membership segments in very different ways. Where there is a slight benefit on the policy side of river cruising is their proximity to land and the many different authorities that govern their work and the ability to work with each of those localities to resume operations, as opposed to global operations that are governed in different ways with these different rules and laws. And so that's why I think you've seen some river cruising resume. We expect to see more of it over the next coming months. And obviously ocean cruising is on a slightly different track, although we know, as a matter of fact, that starting next week, some ocean-going cruises will sail in Europe in very limited itineraries to really just begin on the ocean-going side.
That's great news to hear. So next week is I could just say a little some hope in the skies for us. So right. It'll be great to see what happens in Europe, and as you mentioned, that's going to kind of see the progress going forward for other areas. So it'll be good to see how that goes. James N. Wright from Skal, Washington has asked, will coronavirus sink the cruise industry as the trust of passengers might be lost? How do you see the future recovery?
Cruise confidence is something that CLIA is very much focused on. And one of the ways that we're working towards that is around the ability to really work with experts in medicine and science, and to be able to share those learnings widely and publicly so that we can use some real data to support cruise confidence. One of the things I'm not really good at is doing facts and figures off the top of my head, but the relative number of COVID cases on cruise ships versus any other travel segment is really low. And so trying to get the word out both about what the facts of the matter was and where we think there's real opportunity going forward, using data and using not our word for it, but the word of experts, is part of the way that CLIA will go about it. In addition to that, there's several content marketing initiatives that are underway. Again, you'll probably see it for river before you see it for ocean. to really share what are the enhanced protocols that are underway and why consumers and policymakers that we focus on should have confidence that this is responsible cruising, even as COVID continues and risk is a consideration for everybody.
And you touched on it a little bit before, and we've heard it from other groups as well. And you mentioned coming out with the COVID-19 policy. Have you put out any other like toolkits or resources or anything like that for your members that they've been able to utilize?
That is a great question. Thank you for asking. Again, there's just so much misinformation that has been circulated around the cruise industry that a priority for us has been to put together messaging toolkits that, again, have the facts and figures that I can't automatically recall, but are important to have and to use with your friends and with media. And these toolkits exist for our members. We're also happy to share them with non-members, but it really is everything you need to know, not only about our COVID response, but the other areas that we work on together. So one that I just want to highlight now, because again, it'll be part of our focus through these summer months, is around environmental sustainability. There's a lot happening legislatively, both in Europe and we expect in the United States around climate, with Green New Deals and what have you. And we think there's a great story to tell about the responsible tourism that exists within the cruise industry. And so in addition to COVID response and messaging and toolkits around COVID, we also have messaging and toolkits around environmental sustainability and destination stewardship and workforce labor, health and safety. And it's a big priority for us to continually update that material so that people are always current on the messaging.
And I'm assuming that's available right through your website?
It is.
Perfect, thank you. A question from Sue Shapiro. She says, I think that the cruise industry got a lot of bad press starting with the failure of Japan to let sick passengers off the Diamond Princess. What, if anything, can cruise lines do to ensure that countries will allow sick passengers to disembark?
Right, and that is, I mean, it's an excellent question. It's the right question. What I know anecdotally is, that there is this fear of being stuck, and a big part of the planning process in each of the CLIA regions is that important conversation that happens with destinations and the local authorities to ensure that there is a plan in place should it be needed. And so as we develop what's going to be a final protocol for CLIA, but what will be final plans for the cruise lines, this is a big area under consideration.
Excellent. Bergen Turkin, who sits on our Skal International Board as a director, asks a question about AI in the cruise industry. She says, we do see high and fast shift in AI usage in hotels in the USA and Asia as it offers contactless service. What is the approach in regards to this with the cruise industry?
Right. This is clearly a place where lemons could be lemonade. One of the opportunities that has arisen from the pandemic is just an explosion of innovation that can be adopted by the cruise lines. And on a daily basis, I can guess that I get about 50 or more products and services that are technological advancements and improvements. And what I'm pleased with CLIA is that we're in the process of putting together an online marketplace that is able to share some of these ideas and innovations in an organized way with the cruise lines. And so I think I can say confidently each of the member lines are looking for that dramatic difference in what cruising represents when it's time to sail again. AI and all of technology is a very big part of that.
Excellent. It's definitely the new age.
Yeah. I say that as I struggle to get on my Zoom, but yes, everything else, all 21st century.
I'm trying to get there myself. I'll be honest, I still struggle. So I think it's when everyone says, "Oh, technology," it's one of those things. So question from David Ross. He says, "Thank you so much for your support of the Skal webinars. I'm happy to have you. His contacts in Cozumel are telling him that they do not expect cruise stopovers before March or April of 2021. Have you heard any specifics about the Caribbean cruising being pushed back that far?" Also, when do you expect specific policies from the CDC for cruise lines to comply with for reopening?
Right. So two different questions. The first one about the Caribbean, Mexico, Central and South America. CLIA has a sister organization, FCCA, the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association, and we're working closely with them in supporting their efforts to work with all of the destinations in the Caribbean, Mexico, Central and South America. And in fact, a task force, I want to make sure it's not a working group, but a task force has come together that's made up of the highest level ministers and the cruise lines to really, again, take the considerations that I shared with you that all of the CLIA cruise lines are considering to work in partnership with each of the countries to really be able to address that. So I haven't heard any time frame that supports or doesn't support David's question about Cozumel. But clearly, the economic impact in the United States is significant. You can imagine the economic impact in the Caribbean and how vital cruising is to that region, which is why CLIA has really extended to support FCCA and all of their efforts to make sure that we are creating some uniformity and some predictability from region to region around, again, the confidence in cruising, not just for consumers, but importantly for governments who have to make these choices. I think the second question then was about the CDC and when we think we'll see something from the CDC. And it's one of these phrases that I said unprecedented, maybe 5 times a day, every day for the first 3 months. Now I say if I had a crystal ball, maybe 5 times a day for the last couple of months. It's unclear, you know, the situation clearly that we in the United States are living in. It is a challenging environment for the CDC to be doing their work in. We look forward to having a productive dialogue with them about the resumption of cruising, but we really have no way to know when they might make any kind of recommendation.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those processes that has to work its way through. So
Right.
I completely
But
understand.
I will say, you know, I want to juxtapose it a little bit to Europe, because again, the pandemic is something, COVID was new to everyone, continues to be new to everyone. On the Europe side of things in the EU, it's been this, I think it was on the 30th of June, EU Healthy Gateways, which is a conglomeration of EU initiatives focused on points of entry, came out with guidance, and that guidance was very much informed by health officials, by experts in medicine and science, and it really started to open the ability for nation states to consider their own protocols. You know, one never knows how it works in the US, but I think there is a path that is supported by health experts overseas that everyone is going to learn from. And that guidance was just recently issued. So I'm hopeful that that will be an important input into the process in the US.
Yeah, it could be this like a framework that they could look off of and use. So that would
Right.
be helpful.
Right. I mean, one of the things that we did as we were working to maintain resumption was to come up with, you know, a plan around resumption of cruising. It's one of the benefits of CLIA is to be able to provide a framework, a policy framework for our members to ascribe to. At CLIA, we're working very closely with all of the lines. I think you've seen some of the announcements recently about blue ribbon panels. Really marquee names, top experts that are informing these plans. CLIA is really collecting all of the best learning from all of those plans, which will develop the policy. And I do believe it will be an impressive product that we can put forward to the CDC and to other health authorities, but we're not waiting for the CDC because the health authorities in other parts of the world are ahead in the development of the virus, and their expertise and their protocols, I think, will just be additional inputs into the CDC.
Wow, that's amazing to hear. So that's impressive. So I'm excited to see that what you pulled together from all that.
Yep.
Dave also is asking another question and asks, what do you anticipate the effect of all the new protocols will have on the cruise prices in the future, if any?
I'm so sorry, say that again.
Dave asks, what do you anticipate the effect of all the new protocols will have on the cruise prices in the future, if any?
Yeah, again, that's one of the areas that CLIA doesn't get involved in, so I can't speak to that. But I think what it will relate to the consumer experience is, again, a real recognition that cruising is the best way to see the world, with mass appeal for families, for millennials, for older people. And again, everything I've seen from our cruise line members is just the intention to really deliver a dynamic, new, enhanced product that, again, positions the cruise industry to be the best way to see the world.
Well, to that point, Rick here is asking, does CLIA have any money to advertise and to show the world that and how safe the industry can be?
Well, like everyone else, we have no money, and it is making it challenging to, we're a membership-driven organization like Skal is, and so many others, and it's tough for everyone all over. One of the ways we're choosing to go about that, because we do think it's important in CLIA's role to help get the good news out, is in some clever ways around, again, the research that is being conducted that can be promoted, clever kind of graphic animations that bring to life the story that big fancy ad could do. And our focus again at CLIA is on the conditions for cruising, what that means for lawmakers and policymakers, and where there's that opportunity to build the confidence for the resumption of operations that will translate to then the consumer piece that the brands themselves will be able to do, with that combined effect that this has been an extraordinary opportunity to enhance all of our practices.
Dennis Smith is asking and saying, many sectors are learning that they can recover with fewer staff. And you mentioned in your presentation the job loss and the effects on that, and saying, and so they're learning they can recover with fewer staff even as they ramp up to full capacity. Cruise ships, as you mentioned, had run with very high staff to guest ratios. What do you see? Do you see a similar pattern arising as things start to ramp back up?
Right. Well, since we know that the resumption of cruising is likely to be limited and phased in with shorter itineraries, you can imagine that the adjustments are made through those decisions. Brian Salerno, who runs our global maritime policy, always uses the phrase that this is not going to be the flick of a switch, and we're not going to immediately go back to the levels that we were pre-COVID. And so there's a natural automatic limiting of staffing as a result of having smaller, shorter itineraries and phased in operations, which is in fact, very hard to hear and challenging. Our approach has been to support these policies and the safe resumption of cruising so that we can confidently get back to levels as soon as the time is right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't recognize the name, unfortunately, but someone's asking, would a successful release of a vaccine escalate the startup of cruising again? And also, what is the update CLIA has on, do you have any, which I don't think you would, but on a vaccine distribution?
See, this is when I wish I had that crystal ball. If I had the crystal ball, then I would figure out how to capture the market on that. But yeah.
Well, based on the article I read yesterday, Oxford is coming pretty close.
I'm all for it. First, best, all of it. So no idea about the vaccine, and I can only imagine just from my own personal experience that a vaccine will make every industry and societal segment, from schools to cruising, feel much more comfortable. And until there is a vaccine, it is about managing levels of risk and where people are comfortable with that, and what provisions that are in place when COVID occurs to provide for the safest public health experience. And that's clearly what we're working on to be able to support in all the ways that I described.
Perfect. Yeah. The article I read for the person asking, Oxford apparently has the lead right now, and it's supposed to come out from AstraZeneca. So I'll be honest, I did purchase some shares of AstraZeneca today.
All right, I'll
So if you're looking for a share tip, that's my tip for the day.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things though, before we leave the topic that again just is amazing to me is cruisers love to cruise. And you know, the idea that there are some people who are waiting for vaccines for schools to resume is clearly a topic we read about in the papers, but anecdotally, again, there's so much enthusiasm from cruisers who are looking to the cruise lines to do what they've done so well for many years, is to provide for the health and safety. And again, the commitment, the understanding that cruise lines are extraordinary at the type of cleaning and sanitation practices is something, again, we hear over and over again, is that cruisers want to cruise. And it's, speaking of being in the news, you know, we've seen some of the art headlines talking about hotels becoming cruise ships because they're going to have hand sanitation stations all over the hotel, when that's clearly something that's been in the cruise industry for many years. So, a backhanded compliment, no doubt, but again, the desire to cruise and the confidence that this industry has been able to provide for safety and well-being for so long, I think is one of the drivers of why cruisers want to cruise. Not why, but why they have confidence to cruise without a vaccine.
No, absolutely. And to your point, that already has been so many safety features are already put into cruise ships. So, and when we mentioned the facilities and things that were already there, there's so much already on those ships that you already have that safety feeling. Earlier you mentioned that you were coming out with a project about how much space there is on a ship. Is there anything more that you can mention about that? What does that look like? What does that entail?
Right. Well, we're in the sausage making part of it now, so hopefully it'll be something that tastes good when we're done. You know, one of the things that CLIA can do for all of its members is provide the kind of context that the media lacks. And so the intent is to really be able to demonstrate that there is space and distance on cruise ships, and that crew is expert in how you can always be moving passengers along in a safe way. So we work with an amazing woman that I think many of you know, Ann Madison, who's leading our global strategic communication efforts, and she's just a master at these graphic animations so that you can get a visual of what it's like to be on a cruise ship, since there's so many people who haven't been, and adding that context is what we're aiming to get at with that. You know, part of what's challenging about being in this situation and the lack of knowledge about the cruise industry is one of the things that makes me so sad about the timing of this terrible pandemic. CLIA had launched a 5-year strategic plan before the pandemic hit that was really intended to tell the positive stories of cruising, about the amazing commitments to environmental sustainability, the work we do with destination stewardship. In fact, we have a partnership with the Global Sustainable Tourism Council in Dubrovnik. Just a wonderful future for cruising, and our ability to get those stories out, again, to lawmakers and policymakers and the public, to really understand the positive attributes of cruising over and beyond the amazing passenger experience. And had we, I think, had the ability to get further into that, I think there'd be more understanding in the media about how extraordinary cruising is, and the measures that are commonplace before the pandemic and are becoming commonplace or more commonplace with other tourism segments, I think would have been beneficial. Without the benefit of that, we've already done a lot of work, and that's how we're able to add context to the media so they have a better understanding of, you know, what the cruise experience is.
That's fantastic. So I feel like everyone had their plans in place. They were plugging along, and then COVID hit, and it's like, okay, I'm putting these plans on the shelf, and then but then even now, I feel many people, it's almost like you can take what you were doing, but you can change it up a bit, because it's almost like a restarting point. So is there anything that you're looking at and saying with CLIA that you're like, I really want to change this, or this is something new, like, let's look at this differently, that you see in the future for the organization?
Right. Well, probably I'll answer in two different ways. The thing I'm most excited about is the ability to connect in these kinds of virtual platforms. I live, as I'm sure you all do, on Microsoft Teams, not Zoom, which is why I was challenged. But there is this increased engagement kind of to be able to see people face to face and not be doing conference calls that has made for greater connectivity within our community. The other thing that has been an exciting silver lining in it all is because we do represent suppliers of the cruise industry with cruise lines, that their new needs now and the ability to be a matchmaker for our members, our executive partners that make up the supplier community, and the cruise lines who have a whole new host of needs, has been what's really exciting. And to be able to play that matchmaking role, I think is unique to CLIA and something only we could do. So I think that's great. On the flip side, we were really looking to the opportunity to do more in-person events as a way to diversify our revenue. To be able to grow the pot, because there's so much need as cruising gets bigger and bigger, or had been getting bigger and bigger. And clearly that's something that's going to be on a much different time frame from a budgetary standpoint. So I think we're not different than any other trade association that is suffering from revenue models that are supported by events. But we are looking for all the creative ways to, again, leverage the platform to fill a niche that now exists that didn't exist before. But at Skal, I'm sure you guys have a similar experience.
Yep, exactly. And I'd say when you mention events and you mention some like the technology and how everyone's utilizing that now, would hybrid events be something that you might be looking to in the future? Because I know those are really what most organizations now are feeling is a need for the future.
Yes, very much. We were scheduled we work with Informa Sea Trade, who has a global cruise conference that unfortunately was canceled in April. And in fact canceled for the remainder of the year, but we convene the port and destination community, especially in Europe, where there are 10 times as many ports and destinations as we see in North America, and we will have that as a virtual event and work towards hybrid events for the remainder of the year, because we had a really robust program, and we've been working hard to try and identify a technology platform that will support all of these different elements. And so I'm just putting this out there to anybody. If you've come up with a solution, I know that you're trying Zoom today for the first time, let me know, because I think we're all in the same boat. But what I do know from participating in ASAE and other places is that people have found a way to monetize some of the virtual events, which is tough because the competition for dollars when everyone is suffering such loss is going to be a challenge for all of us. And I'm very eager to hear from anyone who has figured out a path on how to do this.
So anyone that's
David, have you guys figured this out? Can you share it with me?
I've heard a few tips I can share with you offline just from things that I've heard. And if anyone else out there has any tips, happy to send you Kelly's email so that you can share them with her too. But yes, there's definitely a few that I've heard, and we had a conversation yesterday as well, so I can connect you on that too. Okay. But I have one last question and then we'll wrap it up. Post-COVID, what is one of the very first things that you want to do, whether CLIA, personal, like connecting with members, whatever it may be? What's one of your top things to do post-COVID?
Take a cruise. I literally cannot wait, and I know our entire staff feels exactly the same way. I think we all had exciting plans in place. There's so many new ships premiering this year, and from a personal and a professional standpoint, that'll be high on the list. Second, maybe equal, would be sending my small young children back to school, because there's nothing like working from home with young children.
I have to say I've enjoyed many Zooms and conference calls with the kids coming in and being in the background. It's been really fun. It's nice to see that personal side of people. I really enjoy it. Yeah,
I have kids, cats, and dogs, so it's the whole menagerie.
Oh, I feel like we should have brought the whole family in. That would have been so fun.
We were so lucky it didn't happen.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great pleasure and really enjoyed learning about CLIA and where everything's going in the industry. Again, feel free to join us anytime. We really enjoyed having you. Anyone, if you have any additional questions for Kelly, please just shoot them over to us, or we can also provide you with her contact information. Go to their website. They have resources available for COVID, but also for the industry as well.
That's right.
The webinar will be posted on Skal USA's website under the news section. If you have any other questions, again, reach out to David, any of the board or Sal's. Have a great day, weekend, stay safe, be well, and see you all soon. Thank you again, Kelly.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, Morgan, Dave, Kelly, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks,
Thanks, Tom.
Dave. Have a good day.
You too, buddy.